Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel for another true crime video, the first one in a while, so let's get on with it. Just a pre-warning for anybody watching this case does contain information about harm to children, so if that's something that's going to upset you, I wouldn't recommend that this video is for you. Today's case is going to be on prolific West German serial killer Joachim Kroll. Kroll was a serial killer who butchered, tortured and killed his victims. He claims to have at least 14 victims, including women and children, and his killing spree only came to a stop when he blocked his neighbours' drains with human remains. He would come to be known by many nicknames, including the Ruhr Hunter, the Duisburg Man-Eater and the Ruhr Cannibal, in a crime spree that spanned over 20 years. Kroll was born to a miner family in Heisenberg, which is now in Poland, but was formerly in Germany. He was the youngest of 8 children, and he was described as being quite weak, not very intelligent, and he quite often wet the bed. His family was stricken by poverty due to the impact of World War II, and in fact Kroll only had an IQ of 76, so he had quite a childlike state, and he didn't make it through many years of schooling. When World War II was over, his family moved to another part of Germany where they bought a farm, and Kroll would help out on the farm, he would help his family out, but unfortunately he was known as the town idiot by the locals. Even as a teen and young adult, he always felt inferior to the young women in his area. When Kroll was a teenager, he witnessed a worker at his family's farm butcher a pig, and this is when his strange arousals occurred. As the pig lay there bleeding, he said that he became aroused, and that this is where they believe his killer tendencies may have come into play. It's believed that Kroll's homicidal tendencies really came out after his mother died, as it had quite a big impact on him. When she died, he moved to Duisburg and got himself a job as a lavatory assistant, where he lived on a street called Friesenstrasse. Neighbours described him as a kind and a gentle man. He would quite often befriend the local children, especially the little girls, but nobody ever saw anything weird about that. In fact, the neighbourhood referred to him as Uncle Joachim. He would buy the neighbourhood children dolls and toys and treats, and they would come round and spend time with Uncle Joachim. Now, obviously we know what his motives were behind this, but they believe that due to his low IQ, he genuinely thought these little girls were his friends. He quite often had a huge collection of dolls, and it is said that he used to act out his homicidal tendencies and practice this on the dolls. Obviously nobody in the neighbourhood had any idea what Kroll was really up to in his spare time. They just saw him as an innocent man making a living and a good neighbour to be around. Kroll was only caught in 1993 after he told one of his neighbours not to use the upstairs toilet because it was, and I quote, blocked with guts. The neighbour didn't take this too seriously. He thought it's a bit of a weird thing to say, but maybe it's just a joke. It wasn't until he found out that the toilets were blocked that he called the police. A plumber was called and they found guts in the plumbing system. Kroll was arrested, and upon his arrest they searched his apartment. When they entered his apartment, they found a pot on the stove with some water, some potatoes, some carrots and a child's hand in the pot. The child's hand would belong to his final victim, Marion. 4-year-old Marion had gone missing and was found 2 days later when Kroll told his neighbour about the guts. The guts in the plumbing system, actually some of them belonged to the 4-year-old girl. There was a pair of lungs, there was a kidney, there was several entrails, and then when they looked in Kroll's fridge and freezer, they found the butchered remains of the little girl being saved for later. At first, in custody, Kroll would only admit to Marion's murder. It wasn't until he got more comfortable in his cell that he admitted to the rest of the people that he had murdered and attacked over his 20-year spree. Shockingly, Kroll told police that he had been saving the flesh of his victims to save on his groceries and the price of meat. In 1955, Kroll committed his first murder. the year of his mother's death. 19-year-old Ingrid Strell was a runaway from home. Kroll spotted her on the side of the street, and there are varying reports, but the main consensus is that he enticed her to follow him with promises of jewels or something of value. He enticed her into a secluded area near a barn, and he began to strike up a conversation. He knew he wanted her, but he knew that she would reject him. So he stabbed, strangled and mutilated her, leaving her for dead. It was then that he gave in to his necrophilic urges. Ingrid was found 5 days later. She was hidden in some snow-covered bushes, and there was DNA evidence inside her and all over her, but obviously at the time that it wasn't as rotund as it is right now. There wasn't as much advancements in technology, so they weren't able to pinpoint exactly who this DNA belonged to. His next alleged victim was 12-year-old Erika Schulte in March 1956. Kroll was never actually charged with this murder due to lack of evidence. However, he has admitted to strangling and raping the poor 12-year-old girl. Took his next victim in June 1956, 24-year-old Clara Frieda Tesmer. Kroll had clocked Clara. He'd gone up to her and tried to strike up a conversation, but she had rejected to talk to him. He tried to grab her by the arm and she reacted badly, so he panicked and they had a little bit of a scuffle. They ended up rolling down a hill where he undressed her, raped her and killed her. Her naked body was found by 5 boys on a bike ride the next day. Now, there are a couple of reports that I've read of 2 different men, but 2 completely different men, who were convicted of this murder, but they're 2 completely different reports and I couldn't find the true story, so I'm not going to include the report of those 2 men. But if it's something you want to look into, I would recommend. It is quite interesting. In July 1959, Kroll took yet another victim, 16-year-old Manuela Knott. She was found in Esner Bredny on a path, naked. She had been strangled and raped, and Kroll had actually taken pieces of her buttocks and thigh to save for later. Now, in a first for Kroll, he admitted that he relieved himself in public after committing this murder. It's also important to note that Kroll wouldn't always do this over the bodies. He did have a collection of sex dolls at home that he would go home and relive the fantasy with them and finish himself off with that as well. Now, another innocent man was sent down for Kroll's crimes. A man was peer pressured by his neighbours into admitting that he committed this murder. He actually served 6 years of an 8-year sentence before he was released when it was found that Kroll was actually the person who committed this murder. Now, it would take another 3 years for Kroll to commit another murder. His next murder would be 12-year-old Barbara Bruder. Now, Barbara was heading to a park with her friend. She'd been to the park and it's thought that she took a shortcut through the woods to go to the park and never made it there, as Kroll was waiting for her in the woods. Kroll was never charged with this one actually, because her body has never been found. So that family has never had justice. They've never been able to bury their little girl because Kroll doesn't remember where the body is and her body has never been found, and so he's never been charged for it. His next victim was 13-year-old Petra Gies in April 1962. Now, Petra was actually on the way to a fair with a friend, so it's thought that Kroll lured her away from her friend and took her to a secluded area. Petra was found with her scarf around her neck, which is what she had been strangled with, and she had been raped and butchered. Now, in this case, Kroll had actually taken parts of her thighs, buttocks, and part of her arms and hands as well with him to save for later. Initially, another man was arrested for this, a 52-year-old sex offender called Vincent Kuhn. He was actually sentenced to 12 years in prison and psychiatric treatment. However, he was released after 6 when it was found that Kroll had actually committed this murder and not this man that was arrested. His next victim would be Monika Taffel, who was killed on the 4th of June 1962 in Warsaw. The 13-year-old's body was found by a police helicopter on the 11th of June. She had been walking home from school when Kroll had abducted her, killed, raped and strangled her. He then also took chunks of her flesh from her thighs and buttocks. Originally, again as with other cases, an innocent man was arrested for the crime called Walter Quicker. He was questioned intensively and then released without charge due to lack of evidence. However, the damage was already done. Walter's wife left him and divorced him, and the local people still believed him to be guilty, so they taunted him every day, and eventually he couldn't take it anymore and he killed himself. Kroll's only male victim would be 25-year-old Herman Schmitz in August 1965. Herman had been at a lover's lane with his girlfriend Marion Veen when somebody had slashed their tyre. Herman got out to see what had happened to the tyre when Kroll attacked and stabbed him, leaving him to die. In a blind panic, Marion jumped into the driver's seat and drove at Kroll as fast as she could, beeping the horn while she could to attract attention. Kroll only just managed to escape with his life that day. Herman died in the arms of his girlfriend Marion, while passers-by rushed over to help. On the 13th of September 1966, Kroll claimed yet another victim, 20-year-old Ursula Rolling. She was found hidden in some bushes, naked from the waist down with her legs spread apart. She had been strangled and also been butchered. Ursula had actually been on a date with her boyfriend Adolf Schickel at the time and was walking home when it is believed that Kroll attacked her. Kroll grabbed her around the neck with his right arm and dragged her into some bushes, which is where he assaulted and killed her. Originally, her boyfriend Adolf Schickel was arrested and questioned but released as there was no evidence to say he had hurt her. However, the general public still believed he was a guilty party, and as with the last innocent man that was arrested, he couldn't take this anymore and would too kill himself. 5-year-old Alona Hart would fall victim to Kroll in December 1966. He abducted her, took her on public transport to where he would complete the murder. He strangled, stabbed and drowned Alona, the only one of his victims to be drowned. He later told police that he drowned her as he wanted to know what it was like to see somebody die of drowning. Kroll did have one surviving victim that we know about, which was 10-year-old Gabrielle Putman. Now, Kroll had lured her into a field where he had tried to show her pornographic images. Gabrielle panicked, she wasn't comfortable with this, so she tried to run, and Kroll grabbed her and strangled her, believing her to be dead. Kroll heard distant sirens near the field that he had dragged her into, and it was the miners coming out of their job. There was a shift switch from the earlies to the lates, and so there were miners everywhere walking home from work, and so Kroll panicked and ran away. She was to survive, and she did tell her parents. However, this wouldn't be reported until 9 years later when Kroll was actually arrested for his crimes. Maria Gettern was Kroll's only older victim. She was a 61-year-old pensioner and was killed in July 1969. Kroll has said that as soon as he saw Maria, he got a tickling feeling and knew what he had to do. He tried to strike up a conversation with Maria, however she declined. Kroll got angry and there was a bit of a tumble. They tumbled into a bush where Kroll throttled the elderly woman, and she was found the next day by passers-by. Kroll's next victim would be 13-year-old Jutta Rahn. She was actually on her way home from school on the train, and this is where it's believed that Kroll saw her on the train, spotted her, followed her off the train and through a woods, which is a shortcut back to her house, which is where he attacked. Now, as with other cases, another innocent person was arrested and questioned for this, which was Peter, her neighbour, who was also her part-time boyfriend. Now, he spent 15 months in prison before he was released due to a lack of evidence, but he too was arrested for a crime that he didn't commit. Another one of Kroll's alleged victims was 10-year-old Karin Topfer, who was killed in May 1976. Now, Kroll was never actually charged for this one as well, due to lack of evidence, but he has admitted to this one. As mentioned before, Kroll's final victim was 4-year-old Marion Ketter, who was actually from his neighbourhood. He killed her in his own apartment. Police had searched for days until they had got the tip off about the blocked drains with the intestines and the guts. When Kroll was initially arrested, he would only admit to the murder of Marion. He wouldn't admit to any of his other murders until he got into prison, got comfortable in his cell, and that's when he admitted to the other 13 murders that he had done. Kroll's trial would take 151 days in total. He really believed that he would have some kind of corrective surgery to fix the issues he had with him, and he would be allowed back into the open world to continue living his life as he had. However, this didn't happen. Kroll's trial began in October 1979 and commenced almost 3 years later in April 1982. Kroll was found guilty of 8 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Obviously, I mentioned those other attempted murders and murders that happened before that he was never charged with due to lack of evidence, but it is believed he has at least 14 victims. Kroll would go on to be sentenced to imprisonment of life. He was deemed as criminally insane and spent much of his time in a psychiatric hospital for the criminally insane. Kroll died in 1991 at the age of 58 of a heart attack, which concluded his life. As I mentioned before, it's believed that Kroll got away with his crimes for so long because the police were looking for somebody who was clever, or looking for several groups of people that had committed these crimes and didn't link the crimes together due to the vast area that he covered. And that concludes the story of prolific West German serial killer Joachim Kroll. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll be back soon with a very new true crime video. Links for other social media are in the description box, so don't forget to like, subscribe and comment with any suggestions for any future cases. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.